The realtor's card slipped from my trembling fingers and landed face up on my kitchen counter. Elena Hartwell, Premier Properties. We specialize in senior downsizing. My daughter Carolyn had left it there during her unannounced visit that morning, along with a stack of brochures for assisted living facilities with names like Golden Meadows and Sunset Haven. As if pretty words could disguise what they really were. Places where old people went to wait for death. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I stood in the kitchen of the home I'd lived in for 42 years, the morning light filtering through the bay windows that overlooked the garden Henry and I had planted together. The counters were the same butcher block we'd installed in 1985. The floor was the original hardwood we'd refinished 3 times. Every scratch, every worn spot, every sun-faded patch told a story. My story. Our story. This house is too big for one old lady, Carolyn had said, using that patronizing tone she perfected since turning 40. The one that suggested she knew better than me about my own life. You're 73, Mom. What if you fall? What if something happens and no one's here to help? This place is just too much for you to handle alone. I'd listened in silence as she'd outlined her plan. Sell the house, which she assured me was worth a fortune in today's market. Move me into a 1-bedroom unit at Sunset Haven, which she'd already toured without telling me. Use the remaining money to secure my future, though whose future she was really securing remained unspoken. Carolyn's husband Marcus had been eyeing my property for months. I'd overheard him on the phone during their last visit, talking about development potential and prime location. The thing was, I wasn't ready to be put out to pasture. I wasn't fragile or confused or unable to care for myself. I still drove, still gardened, still volunteered at the library twice a week. My mind was sharp, my body capable. But to Carolyn and Marcus, my age was evidence enough that I needed managing. That my independence was negotiable. That my home, my sanctuary, was just an asset to be liquidated. I picked up the realtor's card and dropped it into the trash. Then I made myself a cup of coffee, sat at my kitchen table and began to think. If they wanted this house, they'd have to do better than condescension and manipulation. They'd have to understand that some things, some places, some lives couldn't be measured in square footage or market value. My phone rang 3 times that afternoon. Carolyn each time. I let them all go to voicemail. On the 4th call I answered. Mom, why aren't you picking up? I've been worried sick. I've been busy, I said simply. Busy with what? Her skepticism was palpable. With my life, Carolyn. The life I still have. There was a long pause. Mom, about this morning. I know change is hard, but Marcus and I have really thought this through. That house is just too much maintenance. The property taxes alone must be killing you. And what about the stairs? What about the yard? You can't possibly keep up with all of it. I've managed for 42 years. I think I can handle it a bit longer. You're being stubborn. Her voice took on an edge. Dad's been gone for 6 years. It's time to move forward. The mention of Henry made my chest tighten. Don't you dare use your father as an excuse for this, I said quietly. He built this house with his own hands. Every room, every detail. This was our dream, our life's work. And you want me to sell it so you and Marcus can what? Develop it into condos? The silence on her end confirmed what I'd suspected. This isn't about money, she finally said, but the words rang hollow. This is about your safety, your well-being. Then let me decide what's best for my well-being. I'm not senile, Carolyn. I'm not incompetent. I'm just old, and apparently that's become a crime in your eyes. Mom, please. Be reasonable. I am being reasonable. You're the one who showed up uninvited with brochures for places I never asked to see. With a realtor's card for a house I never said I wanted to sell. You made plans for my life without consulting me, and now you're upset that I won't cooperate. We just want what's best for you. No, I said firmly. You want what's best for you. And I understand that. But this is my home, Carolyn. Mine. And I'm not going anywhere. I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from weakness. From anger. From the realization that my own daughter saw me as an obstacle to be removed, a problem to be solved. Not as a person with agency, with desires, with a right to live as I chose. That night I walked through every room of my house. The living room where we'd hosted countless dinner parties, where Henry had taught Carolyn to dance standing on his feet. The dining room where we'd celebrated every holiday, every milestone, every ordinary Tuesday that felt extraordinary simply because we were together. The master bedroom where Henry had died peacefully in his sleep, holding my hand even in his final moments. The second bedroom that had been Carolyn's, still painted the lavender she'd chosen when she was 12. The guest room that had housed my mother during her final years. The attic where boxes of memories gathered dust, waiting for someone who cared enough to go through them. The basement where Henry's woodworking shop remained exactly as he'd left it, his tools hanging on pegboards, his unfinished projects still clamped to workbenches. This house wasn't too big. It was full. Full of life, of love, of 42 years of moments that had shaped who I was. To call it too big was to suggest that those memories didn't matter, that the space they occupied was wasted on someone whose future was supposedly behind her. I returned to the kitchen and pulled out a notebook. If Carolyn wanted to treat this like a business negotiation, then I'd approach it like one. I'd show her exactly what this house meant, what it could still mean. I'd prove that an old lady in a big house wasn't a liability. She was a force to be reckoned with. The next morning I called my old friend Dorothy Chan. We'd met at a community board meeting 15 years ago, and had been inseparable ever since. Dorothy was 71, sharp as a tack, and had made a career in real estate before retiring. If anyone could help me understand my options, it was her. She arrived within an hour, her silver hair perfectly styled, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Margaret Sullivan," she said, settling into my kitchen chair with a cup of tea. "What trouble are you getting into now?" I told her everything. The visit from Carolyn, the brochures, the pressure to sell. Dorothy listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each detail. When I finished, she set down her teacup with a decisive clink. "They want you out so they can develop the property." That's what I figured. "Do you want my professional opinion?" Dorothy leaned forward. "This house is sitting on nearly half an acre, in one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city. The location alone makes it worth a small fortune. But the real value isn't in the house itself. It's in what someone could build here if the house wasn't in the way. So I'm in the way. To them, yes. To anyone with vision and a lack of sentiment, yes." Dorothy's eyes softened. "But Margaret, this is your home. You don't owe it to anyone to leave just because it's convenient for them." "I don't want to leave," I said firmly. "But I also don't want to spend the rest of my life fighting with my daughter over this." "Then don't fight." Dorothy smiled, that mischievous glint I knew well. "Show her what this house can really do. Show her that too big doesn't mean too much. It means possibility." "What do you mean?" "I mean, my dear friend, that it's time to remind Carolyn and everyone else that you're not done living yet. That this house isn't a burden. It's a resource. And you're exactly the person to prove it." Over the next week, Dorothy and I developed a plan. It started with research. I spent hours online, reading about community programs, housing initiatives, and ways people were using their homes to create positive change. I visited the senior center, talked to the librarian, reached out to organizations I'd worked with over the years. What emerged was something I hadn't expected. An opportunity. A chance to turn Carolyn's criticism into something meaningful. There was a growing need in our community for temporary housing. Young women aging out of foster care with nowhere to go. Single mothers fleeing domestic violence who needed a safe place while they rebuilt their lives. College students who couldn't afford dorm costs. The waiting lists were months long, sometimes years. My house had 4 bedrooms. A finished basement with its own bathroom. A large backyard. A kitchen built for feeding crowds. Space that sat empty while people who needed it desperately went without. Dorothy helped me navigate the legal requirements. Background checks for potential residents. Insurance considerations. Zoning regulations. We discovered that the city had programs to support exactly what I was proposing, including grants and tax incentives for homeowners who opened their doors to those in need. Within 2 weeks, I'd completed all the paperwork. I'd been approved as a host home for the City Housing Initiative, a program that matched homeowners with people in temporary housing crises. I'd set up bedrooms, stocked the kitchen, and prepared to welcome my first resident. I didn't tell Carolyn any of this. Let her think I was just a stubborn old woman refusing to face reality. The truth would reveal itself soon enough. My first resident arrived on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Her name was Jessica Torres and she was 19 years old. She'd aged out of foster care 6 months earlier and had been sleeping on friends' couches ever since. She had a job at a grocery store, was taking night classes at community college, and was trying to save enough for her own apartment. All she needed was a stable place to stay for 6 months while she got on her feet. Jessica stood on my porch with a single duffel bag, looking at the house with wide eyes. "This is really all for me?" she asked when I showed her to the guest room. "This is your room for as long as you need it," I corrected gently. "Make it your own." She cried when she saw the private bathroom, the desk where she could study, the window that overlooked the garden. "I haven't had my own room since I was 7, she whispered. That night I made dinner for 2. We sat at my kitchen table, this young woman and me, and talked about her classes.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Her dreams of becoming a nurse, her fear that she'd never catch up to her peers who had families and support. I listened and offered what I could. A home. A meal. The knowledge that someone believed in her. 2 weeks later, my second resident arrived. Maria Santos was 31 with 2 young children, ages 4 and 6. She'd left an abusive marriage and was working 2 jobs while waiting for a subsidized apartment to open up. The domestic violence shelter could only keep her for 30 days, and her time was almost up. I gave her the master bedroom, the largest one, so she and her children could stay together. I set up the smaller bedroom as a playroom, filling it with books and toys I found at garage sales. Maria cried too, but tried to hide it from her children. "Thank you," she kept saying. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." Within a month, my too-big house was full of life again. Jessica studied at the kitchen table every evening, while I helped Maria's daughter with her alphabet. Maria cooked dinner on the night she got home early, filling the house with the scent of her grandmother's recipes. Her son played in the backyard, his laughter echoing off the walls Henry had built. The house that had felt empty now felt alive. The rooms that had held only memories now held futures being built, dreams being pursued, lives being saved. Carolyn found out, of course. She showed up unannounced one Saturday morning, probably hoping to catch me struggling with yard work or unable to manage the house. Instead, she found me in the kitchen with Maria, both of us making breakfast while Jessica played with the children in the living room. The look on her face was priceless. Shock, confusion, and something that might have been anger. "Mom," she said slowly, "what is going on here?" "I'm living my life," I replied calmly. "Would you like some coffee?" "Who are these people? Why are they in your house?" "They're my residents. I'm part of the city housing initiative now. I provide temporary housing for people in need." Carolyn's face went through several shades of red. "You what?" "Without discussing it with me? I'm 73, not 7. I don't need permission to make decisions about my own home. This is insane. You're letting strangers live here? Do you have any idea how dangerous that is?" "They're not strangers, Carolyn. They're people who needed help, and I had the space to provide it. Everyone's been thoroughly vetted by the city program. Background checks, references, the whole process." Maria, sensing the tension, quietly excused herself and took the children upstairs. Jessica followed, giving me a supportive look as she went. When we were alone, Carolyn exploded. "Have you lost your mind? You're turning this house into some kind of charity shelter? What about your safety? What about your privacy? What about the value of the property?" There it was. The real concern. "The value of the property," I repeated slowly. "That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Not my safety. Not my well-being. The money you and Marcus were planning to make when you convinced me to sell." Carolyn's face went pale. "That's not fair. Isn't it? You showed up here with a realtor's card and brochures for places I never asked about. You decided my house was too big. Without asking what I wanted. You made plans for my future as if I had no say in it. All because you saw this place as an investment opportunity, not as my home. We just wanted to help you." "No," I said firmly. "You wanted to help yourselves. And I understand that. I do. But Carolyn, I'm not done yet. I'm not ready to be put in a box, literally or figuratively. This house has space and I have time, and there are people who need both. So that's what I'm doing. I'm using what I have to help who I can. This is temporary though, right? Carolyn asked, grasping at straws. You'll do this for a few months and then realize it's too much work? I've committed to at least 2 years with the program. After that, we'll see. 2 years? Mom, you'll be 75. And hopefully still capable of making my own decisions. Carolyn grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with frustration. Fine. Do what you want. But when this all falls apart, don't expect me to clean up the mess. If it falls apart, I'll handle it myself. Just like I've been handling my life for 73 years. She left without saying goodbye. I heard her car peel out of the driveway, probably already calling Marcus to complain about her impossible mother who refused to be managed. I returned to the kitchen where Maria was waiting nervously. I'm sorry, she said immediately. I didn't mean to cause problems with your daughter. You didn't cause anything, I assured her. This has been brewing for months. You just happened to be here when it finally boiled over. Do you want us to leave? Maria's eyes were fearful. I can find somewhere else. I don't want to make your life harder. I took her hand gently. Maria, you and your children are welcome here for as long as you need. My daughter will come around eventually or she won't. Either way, my decision stands. This is my house, my life, my choice. That evening, as I sat in my living room with Jessica studying at one end of the couch and Maria's children playing quietly on the floor, I felt something I hadn't felt since Henry died. Purpose. The house wasn't too big. It had been waiting for this. For lives to fill it again. For laughter to echo in its rooms. For its space to mean something beyond memories. Carolyn didn't call for 3 weeks. When she finally did, her voice was stiff, formal. I just wanted to check in. Make sure you're okay. I'm fine, I said. Better than fine, actually. How's your little project going? It's not a project, Carolyn. It's my life. And it's going well. Jessica got promoted at work. Maria's children started at the elementary school down the street. We're managing. Another long pause. Mom, I spoke with Marcus. And with a lawyer. My heart sank. Of course you did. We're concerned about liability. About what happens if someone gets hurt in the house. About your responsibility if something goes wrong. Everything is covered under the city program's insurance. Dorothy helped me make sure of that. Dorothy-chan? That busybody? That experienced real estate professional who happens to be my friend, I corrected. She's been invaluable. I heard Carolyn sigh. Look, I'm not trying to be the villain here. I'm just worried about you. Then trust me, I said gently. Trust that I know what I'm doing. Trust that I'm still capable of making good decisions. Trust that when I need help, I'll ask for it. Will you, though? Will you really ask? The question hung between us, heavy with years of complicated mother-daughter dynamics. The truth was, I didn't know. I'd always been independent, perhaps to a fault. But that was something for me to work on, not an excuse for Carolyn to take over my life. I'll try, I said finally. That's all I can promise. After we hung up, I sat in the gathering darkness of my living room, thinking about trust and control, about aging and autonomy, about how hard it was to watch your parents grow older, to see them slow down, to fear the inevitable, but also about how dehumanizing it felt to be treated, as if your age erased your right to choose your own path. The months that followed brought changes I hadn't anticipated. Word spread about what I was doing, and suddenly I was receiving calls from the city program, from local churches, from organizations that worked with vulnerable populations. They wanted to know if I could take more people, expand the program, serve as a mentor to other homeowners considering similar arrangements. I started attending community meetings, speaking about my experience, encouraging others to consider opening their homes. Dorothy came with me, providing the practical real estate and legal perspectives while I spoke from the heart about what it meant to have space and share it. More people in our neighborhood began participating in the program. The elderly couple 3 doors down took in a young man with developmental disabilities who needed support while attending a job training program. The widow across the street hosted a refugee family while they learned English and adjusted to their new country. Our street transformed from a quiet collection of individuals into a real community, connected by purpose and compassion. Jessica saved enough money and moved into her own apartment after 7 months. She cried when she left, hugging me tightly. You changed my life, she said. You gave me a chance when no one else would. You changed mine too, I replied honestly. You reminded me what this house was for. Maria and her children stayed for a year. In that time, she got her nursing assistant certification, secured full-time employment with benefits, and saved enough for first and last month's rent on a small house. Her divorce was finalized, and she was building a new life on her own terms. On their last day, her daughter gave me a drawing she'd made. It showed a big house with flowers in the garden and stick figures labeled Grandma Margaret, Mama, me, and Brother. Under it, in careful letters, she'd written, "Thank you for loving us." I framed it and hung it in the hallway, a reminder of why space mattered, why home mattered, why refusing to be made small was an act of love. After Maria left, I took in 2 college students who couldn't afford campus housing. Then a middle-aged man who'd lost his job and his apartment in the same week. Then a young couple expecting their first baby, trying to save enough to get established. The house cycled through residents, each one leaving a mark, each one adding to the story of what this place could be. 18 months after I'd started the program, Carolyn showed up again. This time she didn't look angry. She looked curious. "Can we talk?" she asked. We sat in the garden, now lovingly maintained by a rotation of residents who enjoyed working with plants. Carolyn looked around, taking in the vegetable beds, the flower borders, the small sitting area with handmade benches. "It looks good out here," she admitted. "Really good. Thank you. Everyone who stays contributes in some way. Some cook, some clean, some garden. It's a community. Mom, I owe you an apology." I turned to look at her, surprised. "I was wrong," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "About the house, about you, about all of it. I thought I was protecting you, but really I was just trying to control a situation that scared me." "What scared you?" "Losing you." The tears came then, streaming down her face. "Dad died, and I became terrified that something would happen to you too. That you'd fall down the stairs or have a medical emergency and no one would be there. That this big empty house would swallow you up. So I convinced myself that the solution was to make your world smaller, safer, more manageable. But it wasn't your decision to make," I said gently. "I know that now. Watching what you've done here, seeing how alive you are, how much purpose you have. God, Mom, you've helped dozens of people. You've changed lives. You've built something beautiful. And I almost took that away from you because I was scared." I reached for her hand. "I'm scared too sometimes. Of getting older, of becoming irrelevant, of being a burden. But fear isn't a reason to stop living. It's a reason to live more intentionally. I'm sorry about Marcus too. About the development plans. That was wrong. Did you tell him that?" She nodded. "We actually separated 2 months ago. It wasn't just about this. There were a lot of things. But realizing how willing he was to push you out of your home just for profit, it made me see him differently." "I'm sorry to hear that." "Don't be. Some things need to break so better things can grow. You taught me that, actually. By refusing to break yourself." We sat together in the garden Henry had planted, in the shadow of the house he'd built, and for the first time in years, I felt my daughter really saw me. Not as an old woman to be managed, but as a person still growing, still changing, still maturing. The program continued and expanded. By the end of 2 years, I'd housed 37 people through various stages of transition. Some stayed for weeks, others for months. Each one taught me something new about resilience, about hope, about the human capacity to rebuild after loss. My 75th birthday arrived with unexpected fanfare. The residents, past and present, organized a party. Jessica came with her nursing school acceptance letter. Maria brought her children, who'd grown so much I barely recognized them. The college students I'd housed brought their diplomas. The man who'd lost everything brought his new business cards. He'd started a landscaping company and was thriving. They filled my house with laughter and gratitude, with stories of where they'd been and where they were going. Carolyn came too, bringing her new partner, a kind-faced teacher named Sarah who immediately offered to help with meal preparation for current residents. As I looked around at the full house, the busy kitchen, the conversations flowing in every room, I thought about that realtor's card Carolyn had left on my counter 2 years ago. The one that said I needed to downsize to make my life smaller, to accept that my best years were behind me. They'd been wrong. All of them. This house wasn't too big for one old lady. One old lady was exactly what it needed. Someone with space to share, time to give, and a stubborn refusal to accept that her worth diminished with her age. Dorothy pulled me aside during the party, a glass of champagne in her hand. "You did it, Margaret. You showed them all. I didn't do it to show anyone anything, I replied. I did it because it was right. Because I could. That's what makes it even better. You didn't do it out of spite or pride. You did it out of love. For this house, for yourself, for people who needed help. I looked around at my full house, my chosen family of rotating residents and dear friends. At Carolyn laughing with Sarah and Jessica. At Maria's children playing tag through the rooms. At the life that filled every corner. It's not too big, I said softly. It never was. It was just waiting for me to understand what it was for. 3 years in, the city program asked me to be the keynote speaker at their annual conference. They wanted me to talk about sustainable housing solutions, about community building, about aging with purpose. I was terrified of public speaking, but Dorothy convinced me to do it. I stood at the podium in front of 300 people and told my story. Not just the facts and figures of how many people I'd housed or how the program worked, but the truth of why it mattered. I talked about the realtor's card, about being told I was too old for my own life, about refusing to believe that my value expired with my youth. They gave me a standing ovation. Afterward, dozens of people approached me, older homeowners who'd been feeling pressure to sell, to downsize, to get out of the way. They wanted to know how to start, what to do, how to push back against families and real estate agents and a culture that treated aging as a problem to be solved rather than a stage of life to be lived. I spent the rest of the conference in impromptu workshops, sharing resources, connecting people with Dorothy and the city program coordinators. By the end of the weekend, 23 new homeowners had signed up to participate in the housing initiative. The movement grew. What had started as my stubborn refusal to be displaced became something larger. A network of older homeowners who rejected the narrative that they were burdens, who chose to see their space and experience as resources to be shared. We called it the Silver Space Initiative, and within a year it had chapters in 6 cities. Carolyn became involved too, using her marketing background to help promote the program and recruit new participants. We worked together, my daughter and I, building something meaningful from the rubble of our earlier conflict. It didn't erase what had happened, but it transformed it into something useful. On what would have been my 45th wedding anniversary with Henry, I sat in the garden at dusk, thinking about everything that had changed. The house that he'd built for our family had become a home for many families. The space we'd filled with our love now held the love and hope of countless others. I liked to think he would have approved. Henry had always believed in using what you had to help who you could, in building things that lasted, in creating beauty and shelter and safety. This house is too big for one old lady, they'd said. And they were right, in a way. It was too big for one person to keep just to herself, to let it sit empty while others went without. But that didn't mean I needed to leave. It meant I needed to share. My current residents, 2 young mothers with infants, came out to join me. We sat together in the cooling evening, watching the fireflies begin their dance across the lawn. One of them was studying to be a social worker. The other was working on her GED. Both had fled situations that had tried to make them small, to convince them they weren't enough. "Thank you for this," one of them said, gesturing to the house, the garden, the peace. "For proving that good people still exist." "Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting," I replied. "For reminding me why it mattered." Inside, through the lit windows, I could see the kitchen where I'd received that realtor's card 3 years ago. The same kitchen, but everything had changed. The house was no longer too big. I was no longer too old. And the future I'd been told was behind me was still unfolding, rich with purpose and possibility. They tried to make me too small for this house. Instead, I'd made the house exactly big enough for all the love it was meant to hold. And I was exactly the right size to fill it with life. The call came on a Tuesday morning in late autumn, 4 years after I'd started the housing program. The voice on the other end was professional but urgent. A woman from Child Protective Services named Linda Brennan. She apologized for the early hour before explaining why she'd tracked down my number through the city housing coordinator. "We have a situation," she said carefully. "A 14-year-old girl named Sophie Chun. Her grandmother passed away 3 days ago, and there's no other family. Foster placements for teenagers are extremely limited, and Sophie has some special circumstances that make traditional placement difficult. Your name came up as someone who might be able to help on an emergency basis." "Special circumstances," I repeated, reaching for my coffee. "What kind of circumstances?" "Sophie is autistic. High-functioning, very intelligent, but she struggles with change and new environments. Her grandmother was her primary caregiver for the past 8 years. They were extremely close. Linda's voice softened. She's not handling the loss well, and we're worried that putting her in a group home situation could be traumatic. I thought of my large, quiet house, of the routines I'd established over the years, of whether I was equipped to handle a grieving autistic teenager. Where is she now? She's been staying with a neighbor temporarily, but that arrangement ends today. We're running out of options, Mrs. Sullivan. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent. Something in Linda's voice told me this was more than bureaucratic desperation. This was someone genuinely worried about a child in crisis. Tell me more about Sophie. Over the next hour, Linda painted a picture of a remarkable young girl who'd lost too much too quickly. Sophie's parents had died in a car accident when she was 6. Her grandmother Dorothy Chun, my friend Dorothy's distant cousin, had taken her in without hesitation. They'd built a life together structured around Sophie's needs. Consistent schedules, quiet spaces, clear communication. Dorothy had been learning about autism, adapting their home, becoming an advocate for her granddaughter. Then Dorothy had a massive stroke. Dead before the ambulance arrived. Sophie had been the one to find her. The child needs stability, Linda said. Someone patient who understands that she might not grieve the way others expect. Someone with space and time, and honestly, Mrs. Sullivan, someone with the kind of heart that opens their home to strangers. I'm 77 years old, I said quietly. Is that appropriate for a teenage girl? Age isn't the issue. Environment is. Sophie needs calm, needs routine, needs someone who won't be overwhelmed by her differences. According to our records and the city program's recommendations, you're exactly what she needs. I looked around my kitchen, thinking about the last 4 years. The parade of residents who'd come and gone, each one teaching me something new about resilience and adaptation. I'd never housed a child before, never mind a traumatized autistic teenager. But I'd also learned that the most important thing I could offer wasn't expertise. It was simply a safe place to land. When can you bring her? I asked. Sophie arrived that afternoon with Linda and a social worker named Marcus Webb. The girl was small for 14, with straight black hair pulled into a ponytail and dark eyes that seemed to take in everything while revealing nothing. She carried a backpack and a worn stuffed rabbit that looked like it had been loved nearly to pieces. She didn't make eye contact. Didn't speak when introduced. Just stood in my entryway, her body rigid, her breathing carefully controlled. I recognized the signs of someone holding themselves together through sheer force of will. Hello, Sophie, I said gently, not moving toward her. My name is Margaret. This is my home, and you're welcome here for as long as you need to stay. No response. Linda touched Sophie's shoulder lightly, and the girl flinched. Sophie communicates when she's ready, Linda explained quietly. Sometimes that takes time. She processes things differently than we might expect. I nodded, remembering what Linda had told me about Sophie's autism. She experiences the world through different filters. Sounds could be overwhelming. Eye contact could feel aggressive. Social cues that seemed obvious to me might be invisible to her. The key was patience and acceptance. Sophie, would you like to see your room? I asked. You don't have to decide anything right now. I'm just offering to show you the space. After a long moment, Sophie nodded once. A small gesture, but a beginning. I led her upstairs to the room I'd prepared. Not Carolyn's old lavender bedroom, which felt too feminine and childish. Instead, I'd chosen the quieter guest room at the back of the house, away from street noise. I'd removed most of the decorations, leaving the walls a neutral cream color. The furniture was simple. A bed, a desk, a bookshelf, a comfortable chair. I'd installed blackout curtains after Linda mentioned that Sophie was sensitive to light. Sophie stepped into the room and stopped. For several minutes she just stood there, her eyes moving methodically across every surface. Then she walked to the window, pulled back the curtain slightly, and looked out at the garden. Quiet, she said. Her voice was soft, almost musical. This room is quiet. Yes, I said. That's why I chose it for you. I thought you might appreciate having a peaceful space. She turned to look at me then, a quick glance before her eyes darted away. Thank you. Those 2 words, spoken so carefully, told me everything I needed to know about this child. She'd been taught manners, taught gratitude, taught to function in a world that didn't always accommodate her needs. But underneath the careful exterior was a girl drowning in grief and change. After Linda and Marcus left, with promises to check in daily and numbers to call if I needed anything, Sophie and I were alone. She'd retreated to her room, and I heard nothing from upstairs for hours. No crying, no movement, just silence. At 6 o'clock, I climbed the stairs and knocked gently on her door. "Sophie, I'm making dinner. Chicken and rice. Would you like to eat with me in the kitchen? Or would you prefer to have a tray up here?" The door opened a crack. Sophie peered out, still holding her stuffed rabbit. "What kind of chicken?" "Baked chicken breasts with herbs. Nothing spicy. Plain rice on the side. Green beans if you'd like them, but you don't have to eat them if you don't want to. Can I eat in the kitchen but not talk?" "Of course. You never have to talk if you don't want to. This is your home now, Sophie. You get to decide what feels comfortable." She followed me downstairs, moving quietly, staying close to the walls. In the kitchen, she chose the chair farthest from the window, positioning herself so her back was to the corner. A defensive position, I realized. Somewhere she could see the whole room and no one could approach from behind. I served dinner and sat across from her, deliberately keeping my movements slow and predictable. Sophie ate carefully, methodically. Everything separate on her plate, nothing touching. She finished the chicken and rice but ignored the green beans. When she was done, she carried her plate to the sink without being asked. "Thank you for dinner," she said to the refrigerator. "It was good." "You're welcome. Would you like to watch television? Read? Just sit quietly? Can I go back to my room?" "Anytime you want. This is your home, Sophie. You don't need permission to go to your own room." She nodded and left, her footsteps barely audible on the stairs. I heard her door close softly, and then silence again. That night, I lay awake thinking about this strange, wounded girl sleeping down the hall. About whether I was equipped to help her. About what Dorothy Chan, my friend, would think of her distant cousin's granddaughter ending up in my care through this web of coincidence and need. The first week was an exercise in careful observation and adaptation. Sophie operated on strict routines, and any deviation caused visible distress. She woke at exactly 6:30 every morning, showered for precisely 12 minutes, and came downstairs at 7:15. She ate the same breakfast every day. Plain oatmeal with honey, no fruit, no variations. She spent her mornings in her room, reading or working on what looked like detailed drawings. At noon she came down for lunch, always something simple and predictable. Afternoons were harder. That's when the grief seemed to hit her hardest. I'd hear her pacing in her room, or sometimes crying in a way that sounded almost angry, grieving with fury at the unfairness of loss. I didn't intrude on her pain. Just made sure she knew I was available if she needed anything. Left notes under her door with simple messages. "I'm here if you want company. No pressure." Or "The garden is nice today if you want to sit outside." On the 8th day, Sophie appeared in the kitchen while I was baking bread. She stood in the doorway, watching me knead the dough with an intensity that might have been unsettling if I hadn't understood it was just how she processed new information. "My grandmother made bread," she said finally. "Every Sunday. The whole house smelled like it. Would you like to help?" I offered. "Or just watch?" "Watch," she decided, moving to sit at the kitchen table. But she told me why she did each step, what it was for. So I narrated my process, explaining why you knead the dough, how you know when it's ready to rise, what makes bread light versus dense. Sophie listened with complete focus, occasionally asking questions that revealed a sharp, analytical mind. When the bread came out of the oven, golden and fragrant, Sophie asked if she could try a piece. We sat together, eating warm bread with butter, and for the first time I saw something like peace in her expression. "My grandmother would have liked you," she said quietly. "She was always looking for people who were patient." "I would have liked her too," I replied. Dorothy Chan spoke very highly of her cousin, said she was one of the strongest people she knew. Sophie's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away this time. "Everyone keeps saying it will get better. That time heals. But it doesn't feel like it will ever be better. Just feels like everything good is gone." "I won't lie to you and say it gets better," I said carefully. "Gets different. The pain becomes something you learn to carry instead of something that crushes you. But it takes time and it's not a straight line. Some days are harder than others." "How long?" "For everyone it's different. When my husband Henry died, it took me almost 2 years before I could think about him without immediately crying. Now it's been 12 years, and I can remember the good parts without the sadness swallowing everything else. But you still miss him. Every single day. Missing someone doesn't mean you're not healing. Just means they mattered. Sophie nodded slowly, processing this. Then she asked if she could have another piece of bread, and we sat together in companionable silence while the afternoon light slanted through the kitchen windows. The breakthrough came 3 weeks after Sophie's arrival. She'd been having nightmares, waking up crying for her grandmother. I'd hear her in the night, the sound of her grief carrying through the old house's walls. One particularly bad night, I knocked on her door at 2 in the morning. "Sophie, can I come in?" A muffled sound that might have been yes. I opened the door to find her sitting up in bed, clutching her rabbit, tears streaming down her face. "I miss her so much," Sophie sobbed. "I miss her and I'm scared I'm going to forget her. Forget what she sounded like or how she laughed or what she smelled like. And then it will be like she was never here." I sat on the edge of her bed, not touching her but close enough to be comforting. "I have an idea if you're interested. Something that might help." "What?" "Tell me about her. Tell me everything you remember. I'll write it down and we'll make sure you never forget." So that's what we did. For the next 2 hours Sophie talked and I wrote. She told me about Dorothy Chen's favorite songs, her terrible jokes, the way she hummed while cooking. About how she always wore the same perfume, something floral and light. About how she'd advocated fiercely for Sophie's needs at school, never accepting that different meant less. About their Sunday routine, bread baking, library visits, quiet time in their garden. I filled 20 pages in my notebook with Sophie's memories. When the tears finally stopped and her words slowed, she looked at what I'd written with something like wonder. "That's her," she whispered. "That's my grandmother. And now she's here, preserved. Anytime you're afraid of forgetting, you can read this and remember. Can we do this again? Add more when I think of things. As many times as you want. We'll fill a whole book if we need to." Sophie lay back down, still holding her rabbit, looking more peaceful than I'd seen her. "Thank you, Margaret. Sleep well, sweetheart." At the door I paused when she called out again. "Margaret, can I call you that instead of Mrs. Sullivan?" Grandmother called everyone by their first names. She said it was more honest. "I'd be honored if you called me Margaret." After that night, things shifted between us. Sophie began to open up more, to ask questions, to share her thoughts. She told me about her struggles at school, how other kids didn't understand why she needed noise canceling headphones or why sudden changes to the schedule made her anxious, how teachers often mistook her directness for rudeness, her need for clarity for defiance. She was brilliant, that much became clear. At 14, she was reading at a college level and had taught herself basic computer programming. But the school system hadn't known what to do with a student who was both gifted and disabled, who needed accommodation and challenge simultaneously. I contacted Linda Brennan to discuss Sophie's educational needs. What we discovered was alarming. Sophie had been falling through the cracks for years. Her grandmother had been fighting the school district for proper support, but progress had been slow. Now, with Dorothy gone, there was no one advocating for her. Well, I said to Linda on the phone, there is now. I spent the next month becoming an expert on autism, on special education law, on the rights of students with disabilities. Dorothy Chan helped, connecting me with advocacy groups and other parents who'd navigated similar battles. Carolyn, using her marketing skills, helped me prepare presentations and documentation. The meeting with the school district was intense. 5 administrators sat across from me, Sophie, Linda, and an educational advocate Dorothy had recommended. They wanted to place Sophie in a special education program that, while well-meaning, would have limited her academically. They saw her autism as a deficit to be managed, not a difference to be accommodated. I listened to their proposal, then pulled out the documentation I'd prepared. Sophie's test scores showing she was performing 3 grade levels above her peers in most subjects. Letters from her previous teachers praising her intelligence and work ethic. Research on best practices for twice exceptional students, those who were both gifted and had learning differences. Then I looked at the head administrator directly. "My granddaughter," I said, and felt Sophie's small hand slip into mine at the word, "needs a program that challenges her intellectually while supporting her neurological differences. She needs teachers who understand that accommodation isn't about lowering standards. It's about removing barriers so she can reach her full potential. Mrs. Sullivan, one administrator began, but I held up my hand. It's Miss Sullivan, actually. And I'm not finished. Sophie has already lost too much. She's lost her parents, her grandmother, her home, and her sense of security. What she will not lose is her education or her future because a school system is too rigid to recognize that different brains need different approaches. The room fell silent. Sophie squeezed my hand tighter. What exactly are you proposing? The administrator asked carefully. I'm proposing an individualized education plan that plays to Sophie's strengths while accommodating her needs. Advanced placement courses in her areas of interest. Access to a resource room when she needs a quiet space. Teachers trained in neurodiversity. Regular check-ins to ensure she's being appropriately challenged and supported. And if we can't provide that, then I'll take this to the school board, the local news, and every advocacy organization that will listen. Because Sophie deserves better than to be warehoused in a program that doesn't serve her needs. It took 3 more meetings, countless phone calls, and more research than I'd done since my teaching days. But we got Sophie the program she needed. Advanced classes with accommodations. Understanding teachers. A support system that recognized her as a whole person, not just a diagnosis. The first day of her new schedule, Sophie came home beaming. They let me work ahead in math, she announced. And my English teacher said I could write an analysis of neurodiversity in literature instead of the standard essay everyone else is doing. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely delighted. She said I was the most interesting student she'd had in years. Sophie paused, looking uncertain. Is that good or bad? Given the context, definitely good. You're showing them what you're capable of when given the right support. That evening, Sophie asked if she could show me something. She led me to her room where her desk was covered with detailed drawings. They were architectural plans, I realized. Designs for buildings with specific features. Wide hallways, quiet rooms, adjustable lighting, clear signage. What is this? I asked, studying the meticulous work. I want to be an architect, Sophie said quietly. I want to design spaces for people like me. Places where sensory needs are built into the structure, not added as an afterthought. Where accessibility isn't about compliance, it's about understanding. I looked at this brilliant, wounded girl who'd taken her own struggles and transformed them into a vision for helping others. Sophie, these are remarkable. You think I could really do it? Become an architect? I think you can do anything you set your mind to. And the world needs architects who understand that not everyone experiences space the same way. Her smile was like sunrise breaking through clouds. Winter came with its own challenges. The holidays were particularly difficult for Sophie. Everywhere she looked, families were celebrating traditions she'd lost. The first Christmas without her grandmother hit her hard. She spent most of December withdrawn, the progress we'd made seeming to evaporate in the face of her grief. I didn't push, just maintained our routines, made sure she knew I was there, and gave her space to feel what she needed to feel. On Christmas Eve, I found her sitting in the dark living room, staring at the tree I'd put up. Grandmother and I always made cookies on Christmas Eve, she said without preamble. Gingerbread. The whole house would smell like spices and sugar. Would you like to make some now? I asked gently. Or would that be too painful? Sophie thought about it for a long moment. I want to remember. But I don't know if I can. What if we try and if it's too hard we stop? No pressure, no expectations. Just an attempt to honor what you had with her. So we made gingerbread cookies at 10 o'clock on Christmas Eve. Sophie walked me through her grandmother's recipe from memory, her voice catching occasionally but never breaking. We rolled and cut and baked, filling the house with that distinctive spicy sweet scent. When the cookies came out of the oven, Sophie decorated 3 of them with meticulous care. 1 for her grandmother, 1 for her parents, 1 for the life she'd had before everything fell apart. Then she took them outside and left them in the garden, a offering to memory. I think she'd be proud of you, I said as we stood in the cold December night, watching snow begin to fall. I hope so. Sophie wiped at her eyes. Do you think the dead know? What we do to remember them? I think love doesn't end just because someone dies. And if any part of them continues, it would be the love. So yes, I think she knows. Christmas morning brought an unexpected visitor. Carolyn arrived early with Sarah, carrying bags of gifts and food. I told her about Sophie, of course, had kept her updated on our progress. But I hadn't expected her to make such an effort. We thought Sophie might enjoy some company, Carolyn explained. And I remember how hard holidays were after Dad died. Being alone in grief is the worst. Sophie was hesitant at first, overwhelmed by the sudden influx of people and attention. But Carolyn and Sarah were patient, following her lead, respecting her need for space and quiet. By afternoon, Sophie was showing Sarah her architectural drawings, explaining her vision with an enthusiasm I hadn't seen before. "You have real talent," Sarah said, studying the plans. "Have you thought about reaching out to architectural firms? Some do internships for high school students." Sophie's eyes went wide. "Really? They'd let someone my age intern? The good ones recognize talent when they see it. If you're interested, I have a friend who works at a firm downtown. They focus on accessibility and inclusive design. Right up your alley." "That would be amazing," Sophie breathed. I watched my daughter and her partner engaging with this girl who'd come into our lives through circumstance and need, treating her with respect and genuine interest. Carolyn caught my eye and smiled, and in that moment, I saw how far we'd both come. From conflict and misunderstanding to this. A chosen family built on acceptance and love. Spring brought new challenges and triumphs. Sophie's advocacy at school had inspired other students with disabilities to speak up about their needs. She'd become a voice for neurodiversity, giving presentations to teachers and administrators about what accommodations actually meant to students who needed them. The local paper did a story on her efforts. 14-year-old autism advocate transforms school culture. The article featured photos of Sophie in her element. Confident, articulate, passionate. It also mentioned me, calling me her guardian angel and foster grandmother. Sophie brought the paper home, her expression uncertain. "They made it sound like you rescued me, like I was some charity case you took pity on. Is that how you feel?" I asked carefully. "No." She shook her head firmly. "You gave me space to be myself while I figured out how to keep living after grandmother died. That's not rescue. That's just love. Then that's what we'll call it. Love." The article had unexpected consequences. Within days, I was receiving calls from other families, other foster situations, other people who'd heard about the house where an old lady and an autistic teenager had built something beautiful from loss. They wanted advice, wanted to know how to advocate, wanted to understand how to support kids who experience the world differently. Sophie and I started holding monthly gatherings at the house. Support groups really, but we called them connection circles. Parents of autistic kids, autistic adults, foster families, advocates. Everyone sharing experiences, offering support, learning from each other. Sophie blossomed in these settings. She was articulate about her needs, patient in explaining how her brain worked, generous in offering insights to parents who were struggling. Watching her transform from a silent, grieving girl to this confident young advocate was one of the greatest privileges of my life. Dorothy Chan attended one of the circles and pulled me aside afterward. "You know what you're doing here is remarkable, right? Not just housing people temporarily, but creating lasting change. Building community. Giving people tools to advocate for themselves." "I'm just providing space," I said, deflecting as always. "No, Margaret. You're providing so much more than that. You're providing acceptance. The message that people don't have to change who they are to deserve love and support. That's revolutionary." Summer arrived with Sophie's 15th birthday. She'd been with me for 9 months, and Linda Brennan had already indicated that the placement would likely become permanent. Sophie had thrived beyond anyone's expectations, and moving her now would be cruel and counterproductive. We threw a party that reflected Sophie's personality. Small, structured, comfortable. A few close friends from school, Sarah and Carolyn, Dorothy and Linda. No surprise guests, no loud music, no overwhelming chaos. Just good food, quiet conversation, and a chocolate cake Sophie had requested specifically. As she blew out the candles, I thought about the girl who'd arrived on my doorstep 9 months earlier. Silent, traumatized, lost. And now here she was. Laughing with friends, comfortable in her skin, building a future on her own terms. After everyone left, Sophie helped me clean up. We worked in comfortable silence until she said very quietly, "I've been thinking about something." "What's that?" "Linda said I could stay here permanently if I wanted. That you'd agreed to be my guardian." "That's right," I confirmed. If it's what you want. Sophie put down the dish she was drying and turned to face me. Why did you say yes? You didn't know me. You could have said no. I agreed. But Sophie, you needed a home and I had one. You needed someone to believe in you and I knew I could. Sometimes the math is just that simple. Is it hard? Having me here? Changing your life for a kid you didn't choose? I smiled at her. Sophie, I chose you the moment I said yes. And no, it's not hard. It's a privilege. You've taught me more about courage and resilience in 9 months than I learned in 77 years before you arrived. Her eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Can I call you Grandma? Not to replace my grandmother. Nothing could. But as something new. Something ours. My own eyes stung with tears. I would be honored. She hugged me then, fierce and quick, before retreating to help finish the dishes. But the word hung in the air between us, Grandma. A title earned through presence and love, not blood. The official guardianship hearing was scheduled for August. It was supposed to be straightforward, a formality. Sophie wanted to stay, I wanted her to stay. All the reports from social workers and therapists and teachers indicated it was an ideal placement. But 2 weeks before the hearing, a complication emerged. Sophie's father had a brother. Marcus Chun had been estranged from the family for years, had never been involved in Sophie's life, hadn't even attended his brother's funeral 8 years ago. But when he learned about the guardianship proceedings, he suddenly appeared with objections. He wanted custody, or more specifically, he wanted the survivor benefits and trust fund that came with custody of Sophie. Dorothy Chun had left everything to her granddaughter. Her house, her savings, a substantial life insurance policy. Marcus saw dollar signs and decided blood relation mattered after all. The day he showed up at my house, Sophie was at her architecture internship, the opportunity Sarah's friend had provided. Marcus Chun was a stocky man in his 40s with hard eyes and an aggressive manner. He pushed past me into the entryway without invitation. Where's my niece? He demanded. I have a right to see her. You have no rights here, I said firmly, blocking his path further into the house. Sophie doesn't know you and you certainly don't know her. She's family. My blood. You're just some old woman playing savior. This ends now. I pulled out my phone. You have 10 seconds to leave my property before I call the police for trespassing. His face flushed red. You can't keep her from me. I'm filing for custody. Then do it through the proper legal channels. But you will not come to this house again. You will not contact Sophie directly. And you will absolutely not intimidate either of us with your presence. He left with threats about lawyers and rights and how I'd regret this. The moment his car pulled away, I called Linda Brennan and then Carolyn. Within an hour, we had an emergency meeting at my kitchen table, strategizing how to protect Sophie from a man who saw her as a meal ticket. The next morning, I had to tell Sophie about her uncle's sudden interest. She took it quietly, processing in her methodical way. Then she said something that broke my heart. Will you still want me if he makes things difficult? Fighting for me is too hard? I took her hands in mine. Sophie Chin, listen to me carefully. There is no fight too hard when it comes to protecting you. Your uncle can bring 100 lawyers and I'll match them. He can make noise about blood and family, and I'll show them what those words really mean. You are my granddaughter in every way that matters, and nobody is taking you from this home unless you want to leave. I don't want to leave. Her voice was fierce. This is my home. You're my family. He's just a stranger who wants my grandmother's money. Then we'll make sure everyone knows that. The custody battle that followed was ugly. Marcus Chen's lawyers painted me as an interfering old woman who'd manipulated a vulnerable child. They brought up my age, suggesting I was too old to care for a teenager properly. They questioned my motives, implying I was after Sophie's inheritance. Our lawyers, led by Patricia Chen's daughter who'd volunteered her services pro bono, presented a different picture. They showed Sophie's transformation over the past 10 months. Her academic achievements, her advocacy work, her emotional growth. They brought in teachers, therapists, friends, all testifying to the stability and love she'd found in my home. Sophie herself testified, and it was devastating in the best possible way. She spoke clearly about her needs, about how Marcus had never been part of her life, about how she'd found safety and acceptance with me. When the judge asked her directly where she wanted to live, she didn't hesitate. With my grandma Margaret. She's the only person besides my grandmother Dorothy who's ever really seen me, who's ever loved me exactly as I am. The judge ruled in our favor. Marcus Chun was denied custody but granted supervised visitation rights if Sophie ever wanted to see him, which she didn't. The inheritance was placed in a trust that I had no access to, managed by an independent trustee until Sophie turned 18. Every accusation about my motives was firmly disproven. When the ruling came down, Sophie cried with relief. I held her in the courthouse hallway, this brilliant girl who'd been through so much, and promised her again that she was safe, that she was loved, that she was home. Fall arrived with Sophie starting her sophomore year. The local architectural firm where she'd interned offered her a continuing position, working on weekends to help develop their accessibility guidelines. She was thriving academically, socially in her own way, and emotionally. One evening as we sat in the garden watching the sunset, she said something that summarized everything we'd built together. You know what I realized today, Grandma? That home isn't a place. It's a feeling. Grandmother's house was home because she was there. Your house is home because you're here. The actual building doesn't matter. It's the person inside who makes it safe. I thought about my own journey. About Carolyn trying to force me out of this house because it was too big. About discovering that big didn't mean empty, it meant full of possibility. About all the people who'd passed through these rooms, each one adding to the story of what home could mean. You're right, I said to Sophie. But also, sometimes the building does matter. Because some buildings are big enough to hold more than one person's definition of home. Big enough for a whole community of people who need somewhere to belong. Like this house, Sophie said, understanding immediately. Like this house, I agreed. That winter, 5 years after I'd refused to sell, Carolyn organized a celebration. Not of me, she insisted, but of what the house had become. We invited everyone who'd ever stayed here. Everyone who'd been part of the extended community we'd built. Over 100 people came. Jessica, now a registered nurse, brought her fiancé. Maria attended with her children who'd grown so much, and her new partner. The college students I'd housed came with their degrees. The man who'd started the landscaping company brought before and after photos of our garden transformation. The 2 young mothers who'd been here when Sophie arrived brought their toddlers, now healthy and happy. And Sophie, my Sophie, gave a presentation about the architecture of inclusion she was developing for her advanced placement project. She talked about how physical spaces could either exclude or embrace, how design choices reflected values, how this house had taught her that accommodation wasn't charity, but simply intelligent design. As I looked around at all these lives, all these stories, all this proof that space shared was space multiplied, I thought about that realtor's card 5 years ago. The one that suggested I was too old for my own home, that the house was too big for one lady, that I needed to shrink my life to fit society's expectations of elderly existence. They'd been so wrong. The house wasn't too big. I wasn't too old. And the life I'd built by refusing to accept their limitations had touched more people, created more good, than any conventional retirement could have achieved. Carolyn found me in the kitchen during the party, refilling drink pitchers. Mom, can I say something? Of course, sweetheart. 5 years ago, when I showed up with that realtor's card, I thought I was protecting you, making sure you'd be taken care of. But really, I was trying to make you fit into a box that felt safer for me, easier to manage. I know I said gently. You could have just told me to mind my own business. Could have stayed angry at me forever. Instead, you showed me a completely different way of thinking about aging, about space, about contribution. You didn't just resist my plans. You created something so much better that my plans looked ridiculous by comparison. I smiled at my daughter. You came around eventually. That's what mattered. I'm proud of you, Mom. Proud of what you've built here. And I'm grateful that you didn't let me convince you to give it up. Sophie appeared in the doorway, looking for me. When she saw Carolyn and me together, she smiled. Everything okay? Everything's perfect, I assured her. Just having a moment with my daughter. Sophie came to stand beside me, and Carolyn reached out to include her in our little circle. My family, I thought. Not the one I was born into or the one I gave birth to, but the one I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back. The party continued late into the evening. Dorothy and her husband played piano while people sang. Children ran through the rooms that had been empty for so long, filling them with laughter and life. Sophie's friends from school mingled with former residents and community members, all connected by this house and the values it represented. As midnight approached and guests began to leave, each one stopped to thank me. But I found myself thanking them back. Because they'd given me something invaluable, proof that age didn't diminish worth, that space shared was never wasted, that the best response to being told you were too much or too old or too anything was to live so fully that the criticism revealed itself as the small, scared thing it really was. Sophie helped me clean up after everyone left. We worked in comfortable silence, our rhythms synchronized after a year of living together. When the kitchen was finally clean, she hugged me goodnight and headed upstairs. At the doorway she paused. "Grandma, thank you for being too stubborn to give up this house. If you'd listened to Aunt Carolyn 5 years ago, where would I be?" "I don't know, sweetheart." 7 years after that first realtor's card appeared on my counter, I stood in my garden on a crisp October morning, watching Sophie load boxes into her car. She was 18 now, heading off to study architecture at the State University with a full scholarship. The girl who'd arrived silent and broken had transformed into a confident young woman, with a clear vision for her future. "Grandma," she called from the driveway, "I think that's everything. Are you sure you'll be okay without me?" I walked over to where she stood, this remarkable person who'd chosen to call me family. "I've been managing this house for almost 50 years. I think I can handle a few months until Thanksgiving break." She laughed, but her eyes were worried. "You're 80 years old now. Maybe it's time to slow down a little." The irony wasn't lost on me. Here was Sophie, the girl I'd fought to keep, now echoing the same concerns Carolyn had voiced 7 years ago. But there was a crucial difference. Sophie's worry came from love, not control. From genuine care, not convenience. "I appreciate your concern," I said gently, "but I'm not ready to slow down yet. I've got 3 new residents arriving next month, and Dorothy and I are launching a training program for other homeowners interested in the housing initiative. There's too much life left to live." Sophie hugged me tightly. "Promise me you'll call if you need anything, and that you'll actually ask for help instead of being stubborn." "Promise to try. That's the best I can offer." After she drove away, I returned to the house that had been the center of so much change. The rooms were quieter now without Sophie's presence, but they weren't empty. They never really were anymore. The house had become something beyond just my home. It was a symbol of resistance against the idea that aging meant diminishing, that space was wasted on those society deemed past their prime. Carolyn visited that afternoon, as she often did now. She'd become one of my strongest supporters, helping manage the administrative side of the housing program and advocating for policy changes that made it easier for older homeowners to participate. "How are you feeling?" she asked, settling into her usual chair at the kitchen table. "Reflective," I admitted. 7 years ago, you stood in this kitchen and told me this house was too big for one old lady." Carolyn winced. "Are we ever going to move past that?" "We already have." I smiled at her. "I'm just thinking about how wrong that assessment was. Not because you were cruel, but because the premise itself was flawed. The house was never too big. The expectations were too small." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You taught me that. You could have proven me wrong quietly, just stayed here and lived your life. Instead, you showed me what was possible when you refused to accept limitations others tried to impose." That evening, I walked through each room as I often did, remembering the people who'd passed through. Jessica learning to believe in herself. Maria rebuilding after violence. The college students finding their footing. Sophie discovering that different didn't mean less. Dozens of others, each with their own story, each adding to the narrative of what this house represented. In the living room, I paused at the wall of photographs we'd created over the years. Every resident, every moment, every triumph preserved. This was the real measure of space well used. Not square footage or market value, but lives changed and futures rebuilt. The doorbell rang, interrupting my reverie. I opened it to find a young woman in her 20s, nervous but determined. "Are you Margaret Sullivan?" she asked. "I'm Elena Hartwell's daughter. My mother was the realtor who left her card here years ago." I remembered the name from that card Carolyn had delivered. "Come in," I said, curious. She entered hesitantly, looking around with wide eyes. "My mother told me about this place. About how you refused to sell and instead created something incredible. I'm in social work now and I wanted to meet you." to understand how you did it. Over tea I told her the story. Not to boast, but to share what I'd learned. That the greatest act of defiance against a society that devalues aging is to live fully anyway. To use whatever resources you have, space, time, experience to create positive change. To refuse to believe that your best contributions are behind you simply because decades have passed. The young woman listened intently, taking notes. We're trying to expand programs like yours citywide. But we keep running into the same obstacle. Older homeowners are afraid. Afraid of change, of strangers, of what their families will think. Then tell them about fear, I said. Tell them I was afraid too. Afraid of losing my daughter's respect, of making mistakes, of proving the critics right. But I did it anyway because the alternative was worse. The alternative was accepting that my life was over while I was still living it. She left with a folder of resources and a promise to stay in touch. After she'd gone, I sat in the gathering dusk, thinking about legacy. Not the legacy of possessions or property value, but the legacy of choices made and lives touched. My phone rang. Sophie checking in as promised. Grandma, just wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm perfect, sweetheart. Just had an interesting visitor. Someone who wants to learn about creating change through stubborn resistance to diminishment. Sophie laughed, that bright sound that never failed to warm my heart. That's my grandma. Still fighting the good fight. Always, I confirmed. Until they carry me out of this house, I'll be fighting the idea that old means obsolete. That night, I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the garden Henry had planted decades ago. The house that they'd said was too big had become exactly the right size to hold all the love and life and possibility I'd poured into it. And I, the old lady they tried to make too small for it, had simply refused to shrink. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new residents, new opportunities to prove that age was just a number and space was only wasted when left empty by choice. But tonight I was content with what I'd built. Not just a housing program or a community initiative, but a living testament to the power of saying no to other people's limitations and yes to your own potential. The house wasn't too big. It never had been. And I wasn't too old. Not yet. Not while there was still work to do, love to give, and lives to change. They tried to make me too small for this space, but instead, I'd expanded to fill it with purpose and meaning and proof that the only true measure of a life well lived is how much light you manage to spread before the darkness comes. And my light, I thought with satisfaction, was still burning bright. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.